Hi, I'm Chris Lee, the publisher at Vandy Sports, and today we're going to do something we have not done. We're going to do a video preview of opponents for Vanderbilt this year. And of course, the Commodores play East Tennessee State in that opener on Saturday, which will be at Vanderbilt Stadium. And let's talk about three things here. Let's talk about ETSU, let's talk about the matchup itself, and let's talk about keys for Vanderbilt. And let's start with ETSU. I think the first thing everybody wants to know is how good is this team? Well, last year it was 4-2. Coach Randy Sanders has been there now for a couple of years. He's 15-15 overall, but he's got the program seemingly headed in a little bit better direction. Again, 4-2 a year ago. They were ranked at one point last season, and they were actually ranked 28th. Not really, they're not ranked, but if you do the others receiving votes, ETSU is ranked 28th this year in the preseason polls. So that would indicate they're a little bit above an average FCS team. Now let's look at what ETSU did a year ago. It scored between 13 and 28, but they did not play any FBS teams a year ago. To oranges when you're comparing these guys with Vanderbilt. Ratings last year, which I like to use when you were looking at how FCS teams match up. Now, let's be clear, the Sagrins are a little bit flawed last year because there was not as much interconnectivity between conferences. You didn't have as many games between FBS teams and FCS teams. I guess you didn't have any a year ago because of the way the schedules went. So harder to know how these teams really stack up between each other. But if there's anybody can do it, it's Jeff Sagarin. Last year, he had Vanderbilt 105 and ETSU 171. So if these two teams had played based on his ratings, it was about a 17-point edge for Vanderbilt on a home field, and adding into the 3 points for a home field advantage if you play that in Nashville. So that's how Sagarin added a year ago. Of course, these teams did play in 2019. Vanderbilt won that one 38-0, and what was a pretty dismal season for both teams. Vanderbilt, of course, did not finish that season well. That led into last year's winless season. ETSU that year went 3-9. I think both teams should be better heading into this year. So let's look at the Buccaneers this year in terms of what they have. ETSU's got 4 preseason All-Americans. So there's a start on offense. They've got a running back named Quay Holmes who rushed for 640 yards a year ago. He had 255 in one game. Their left tackle, Tremont Shorts, is an All-American. He's 6'4", 335, so that's something for Vanderbilt to contend with. And then you've got a quarterback in Tyler Rydell who split time a year ago. He's their starter this year. He threw for 575 yards in 3 games with 3 touchdowns and 2 picks. On defense, where they're probably a little bit better, they've got an 8th-year player. Yeah, you heard that right. Temple transfer Jared Folks through COVID and through medical red shirts and things is the first player, I think, in the history of the NCAA to get an 8th year. He's a good one. He's an All-American. He led them with 50 tackles a year ago, had 4 for loss. They've got a corner in Tyree Robinson, I think was also a preseason All-American. Didn't rack up the stats a year ago, didn't have any picks, but sometimes that's a good sign for corners that people weren't throwing at him. Anyway, he had 17 tackles. So those are sort of the guys to watch for ETSU. Now, on the Vandy end, let's go through some keys to the game. I think for the Commodores in an opener, and especially in a game like this, one of the keys is just look sharp. You want to come out, you want to avoid penalties, you want to avoid turnovers. So I think that's thing number one. I think Clark Lee would tell you that too, is you want to see them go out and play discipline and execute pretty well. So I think anytime you've got a game like this where you've got an upside-minded team, that's a key. Number 2, I think, is protecting the passer. Not just for that one, but they need to establish that they can protect Ken Seals. That was a really big issue for them in camp. And if you can't fix that against ETSU, that's going to be an issue going forward. So I think protecting the passer is going to be a big thing, how they play on the edges. And I think that makes Tyler Steen, their left tackle, a guy to watch, and Bradley Ashmore on the other side, a guy to watch too. Another thing related to quarterbacks, Mike Wright is apparently going to get some time in this game. You want to see how that goes. Wright is not the passer that Seals is, but he adds a running dimension. Clark Lee mentioned this week they're going to use him in this game, so I want to see what that looks like. On the other side, I want to see if Vanderbilt can generate a pass rush. I think that's something they're going to do a lot better this year. They didn't really do that last year very much, even though they had a couple of guys who are now on NFL rosters, and Dio Odingbo and Andre Mintz. Both those guys were pretty good at that. Of course, Derek Mason didn't really turn them loose in that system a lot. I think this is going to be different this year. Jesse Minter, their defensive coordinator, has been really aggressive in practice. So I want to see, will Vanderbilt carry that forward into this year? And I think ETSU will be a good test. Number two, can Vanderbilt cover? That was a big issue for Vandy on the back end a year ago. The defensive backs just were not in position to make plays. There were almost no interceptions to speak of. They had two all year, only one among returning players. I think that was Jalen Mahoney. So Vanderbilt made a lot more plays in the secondary in fall camp, and I want to see if that translates into this one. The last thing that I think I look for in an opener in particular, and especially one like this, where Vanderbilt should be able to get a lead and open up some space, is who are the freshmen who play? That's one thing that fans always think about is who are the freshmen, the up-and-comers who are going to maybe have a shot this year. And I've circled a few names here. I think on offense, Patrick Smith is an obvious choice. He is going to maybe be the backup running back this year for Ray Davis. So Smith's a kid who was the player of the year in New Jersey last year. I think he's going to get a shot. He may not be the second guy for carries. In fact, that's probably Rocco Griffin. But I think you're going to see Patrick Smith get a shot at some carries in this game, almost certainly. James Ziegler, another guy who's a freshman who could get some carries. They moved him from defensive back over to the offensive side of the ball for this year. So I think that's one to watch too, is those two guys on offense, and also Quincy Skinner, the receiver, who did so well in fall camp. I think Skinner's a kid who's got a chance to be a really good player for them. He's got to be more consistent with catching the ball. But I think this will be a game where he gets that kind of opportunity. Defensively, I'll start up front. Two guys that I like that I think have a shot to have a contribution in this game. One would be Marcus Bradley, the defensive lineman. He just was so good at times in fall camp. He could play on the edge. He can play inside. Devin Lee, another lineman who I think really did some good things. I would expect those guys would get a shot in this game. You always need 8, 9, 10 defensive linemen in your rotation. I think both those kids have a shot to be in that number to start this one. You go to the secondary then, because you saw a lot of freshman defensive backs get action for Vanderbilt in fall camp. And I'll start with three guys. Taco Wright, he's Mike Wright's brother. He made a lot of plays in fall camp. And now with freshman, consistency is sometimes an issue. And sometimes just because guys make plays, and I'm not saying this is necessarily the case, but you didn't see him in the 2 deep depth chart. Sometimes there's more to things other than getting your hands on the ball and making picks. It's being consistent. And that's hard for a freshman to do as a defensive back. But I think Taco Wright's a kid who made enough plays in camp. I think he's in their future somewhere. You saw him used sometimes in the return game. What if this game gets out of hand? If you might not see him return a punt or two. So Taco Wright's a guy that I think will get a shot on the back end. And two other guys, or really three other guys that I think might play against ETSU. Two of the corners, Tyson Russell and Marlon Sewell, they're on the field a lot in fall camp. And I think those are kids that I'm circling as kids I want to watch. And probably James House IV, too, a local kid from Brentwood. I don't know that he was on the field as much as those other guys were, but he was on the field some. He was an early enrollee. Again, a guy that they trusted with some return reps at times. So in terms of players that I'm looking to get time in game one, I'd say those 8 or 9 are the freshmen that I would say are probably the guys with the best shot to get some time against ETSU. Let's go to the matchup. I don't really see much in it that's problematic. Again, ETSU is an above-average FBS team, and so Vanderbilt's got to take this game seriously. But again, the last time these teams played, although under different circumstances, Vanderbilt won this pretty handily. The Sagarins say Vanderbilt would have won it handily a year ago, even though Vanderbilt was, frankly, in the midst of an awful year and ETSU was having a good year. Sagarins, again, are generally a pretty good indicator of where things are headed. So to me, I think if Vanderbilt just avoids turnovers and mistakes, and the other thing, too, I think they need to contain the rushing game. When you've got a back that's as prolific as Quay Holmes was, you want to make sure that ETSU doesn't control the clock, keep your defense on the field, and then that, again, combined with potential mistakes. Those are the spots where you would run into trouble if you're Vanderbilt. So I think if Vanderbilt can just really make sure ETSU's offense doesn't stay on the field for a long time, if it can avoid mistakes, maybe force some turnovers, which frankly this group was much better at in fall camp than it had been, I think I like Vanderbilt's chances in this one pretty well. And by the way, after the game, Bruno Reagan and I are going to be live in the press box. We will have a YouTube game day show afterwards where we'll come on and we'll talk about what we have seen, how the game went, maybe field some questions. So that'll be a new feature this year. If you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, be sure and do that. That way you get notifications when we go live. And anyway, that'll be something we should have a lot of fun with. It's always fun to cover an opener and see a new coaching staff. So I'm really looking forward to doing that with Clark Lee and see what they bring to the table on Friday night. Anyway, I'm Chris Lee, the publisher at VandySports.com. Thanks for watching this. And again, we're going to do these videos a whole lot more during the 2021 football season.